Paul and Jane have been married for 22 years, but not everything has been so rosy. Jane complained that her work was dragging her down, and Paul spent a lot of time on his hobbies. And Paul was often puzzled by Jane's endless ability to find things to buy for their home. But these were minor annoyances in a long and very happy marriage. At 45, Jane remained an attractive, mature woman. She had only added a few pounds over the years, and they seemed to have taken root in all the right places. In high school, she was rather unassuming and had a hard time gaining friendships and confidence. But many of those youthful stars that had gotten in her way now looked just plain ugly. She worked as an office manager in a government department and was competent and respected. Paul had thought she was very beautiful when they married, but now she was truly beautiful and elegant. Paul kept himself in shape, aided by his work as a self-employed and energetic project manager. With sandy hair and 5 feet 10 inches tall, he didn't stand out from the crowd, but he was immensely popular with his longtime friends. They dealt with the empty nest in different ways. Paul loved his free time, reviving all his hobbies and enjoying the free time that came along. He felt healthier and more energetic, but worried about his wife, who missed the children. It wasn't just a longing for them, she described it as an emptiness. Jane had an interesting personality and was able to balance her family and social life, but when the children left for college, that luster gradually faded. Paul tried to do his best to give his faithful and loving wife strength. When he tried to describe her situation to friends, the phrase, lack of purpose, came to Jane's mind. Jane felt increasingly detached, and Paul wondered if she was going through menopause or depression. Paul advised Jane to go back to the gym, and that helped a little. She never liked it, but it helped pass the time, and she liked the results. She had tightened up the slight cheek that appeared on her lower abdomen and butt. Paul thought the result was excellent and suggested that Jane show off everything she had done and be glad she was in shape. She deserved some new outfits. He hoped it would give her a much-needed boost of confidence as well as his reassurances. Jane seemed to be paying more attention to her appearance, and Paul hoped she was starting to change for the better. Dark leggings and baggy tops had been replaced by fitted skirts and silk blouses. Paul thought it all looked great on her newly trimmed body. She continued her long-standing night out with the girls, and Paul encouraged it. Jane didn't have many admirers when she was younger. She was rarely approached, all the attention going to her best friend, Helen. This had been happening more often lately, but she knew how to politely decline the advances. Her friends were good company. Helen had recently broken up but was dating again, and she had a steady boyfriend they chatted about endlessly on the phone. Jane usually came back from the girls' parties happy, a little drunk and very talkative, and at these parties it was nice to see the old Jane. Paul lamented the lack of interest on her part. When they married, they were both inexperienced, and with the arrival of the children, the initial spark seemed to have finally faded. Paul had tried different approaches, being more assertive, arranging romantic dates, weekend trips, different positions and locations, but none of them had aroused enthusiasm. Jane never objected, saying it was all fine, but at the same time she never took the lead. Next chapter. When Jane mentioned the house party at Helen's, Paul almost jumped up from his seat. Any excuse to go and have fun would be just fine with Jane. The night of the party, they packed up and took a cab to Helen's house. Paul thought Jane looked stunning in a tight satin dress that emphasized her figure and told her so. She smiled sweetly. "Thank you, I'm a little shy in that dress, but you just made me happy. You have such a gift for making people around you feel good. You are always so kind and understanding. I love you." Paul liked Jane's answer, but it was a bit annoying and repeated many of the words he had heard over the years. He was a good guy, he was kind and caring, etc., etc. This held him back in his youth. He often found himself in the friend zone of the girl he really wanted to ask out. At times he felt this way with Jane. He was sure she loved him, but did she really desire him? And wasn't he greedy that, after so many years together, he still wanted both? They arrived at Helen's place. It was a beautiful place with plenty of space. There were about 40 guests, and there was a good atmosphere. Helen seemed a little surprised to see them both. "Hi, Paul. It's good to see you. It's been a while." She looked at Jane, who smiled and nodded. "Good to see you, Helen. Sorry to hear about your breakup, but Jane tells me you're dating again." "Yes, I am dating. Let's get to know each other better." Helen introduced her boyfriend, Nev, and as they shook hands, Jane said she would like Paul to meet their friend Will. Will held out his hand. He clearly wanted to shake it, but Paul hated handshakes, carelessly ignoring the firm squeeze. They made small talk. Jane introduced the others, and among them were several people Paul already knew. He got the impression that some of his friends were surprised to see Jane with her partner in tow. He guessed it was because they rarely attended each other's social events. An hour later, as Paul sat down to chat, Jane excused herself, moving from one group to another. Paul noticed Jane chatting with Will and Neve. They were keeping Helen and a few other people who went to hen parties. Jane came back every now and then to check that Paul was all right. He noticed Will hugging her back as she returned to their group. What surprised him most was that Helen didn't brush him off at first, but only cast a nervous glance at Paul and pulled away from Will's arm. Something was wrong, and he wondered if he should leave or face them. But he didn't want to make a scene, and any accusation would look childish. He wondered if he should find out more, and casually asked his interlocutors if they knew Helen's group, but no one said anything specific, although one woman said they went in pairs. By the time he'd struck up a few conversations, poured himself another drink, and tried to get his muddled thoughts in order, Jane had already left. Paul looked around the first floor and headed for the garden. He had just about given up when he heard voices from the side of the house and followed the path around. As he approached, Paul heard Helen clearing her throat, trying to relay a warning to Jane. Jane, Jane, it's Paul. Paul couldn't believe it. Jane was kissing Will. She looked at Helen, who nodded towards Paul with raised eyebrows and some concern. Jane jumped up. Oh, Paul, sorry, it was just a little kiss. Maybe we've had too much to drink. Paul pointed at Will, but Jane quickly stepped between them, panicking at the sight of Paul's anger. They all hesitated. If Jane hadn't intervened, he would have lashed out at Will. Maybe it was for the best. In reality, the guy looked younger, stronger, and fitter. I'm sorry, Paul, that's okay. I think we need to talk. No, we don't. It was so unreal he couldn't realize what was happening. He needed to leave before he finally lost his temper and rushed away, and Jane screamed after him. Jane was distraught. This was not how this evening was supposed to go. She berated herself for trying to snatch a quick kiss from Will. Jane was surprised when Helen's boyfriend Nev brought Will to the party on Thursday. He walked up to her and was just adorable. She wasn't used to so many compliments, especially from a much younger and handsome man. He and Nev joined her in extolling the virtues of mature ladies. Will was clearly staring at her and not apologizing for it. The whole thing was just overwhelming. For the first time in her life, Jane had thoughts and desires, and she wasn't sure she could or wanted to control them. She still loved her husband, but Will was a heady mystery to her. She was interested in meeting and socializing with other, younger, and more interesting people. She became fixated on Will. He constantly intruded on her thoughts. The next morning, Paul and Jane were sitting at the kitchen table. I'm so sorry, Paul, but last night was a big mistake. Everything is very confused and I can't think clearly. Spending time with friends has shown me that we can experience things together with other people. It doesn't have to be just me and you. There can be different sides to our lives. There's nothing wrong with friends, but he seems to be your boyfriend. Are you dumping me? Don't be silly, Paul. He's not my boyfriend and I don't want to dump you at all. We sleep together every night, wake up together, spend our whole lives together. Except when you spend time with your boyfriend. I don't have a boyfriend, Paul. Don't say that. Kissing, touching. Who the hell is he then? He's a friend, that's all. Bullshit. It clearly wasn't the first time. Jane hesitated, trying to frame the conversation carefully and at the same time trying to be truthful. She did love Paul, and they were destined to spend the rest of their lives together. I don't think I've been in a healthy state, Paul, and No, I need to keep what helped me get out of this quagmire. I need you, your continued support and time with friends. Paul flinched. You mean time with Will? That was the problem. She knew it was wrong, but she really wanted to keep seeing Will. She didn't want to hurt Paul or lie to him. He deserved honesty. I'd like to keep spending time with this group. We're all great friends. Paul growled. Especially Will. I assume you're not just friends. Are you having an affair? No, absolutely not. It's not an affair. Well, I have a distinct feeling that your other friends are well aware of your affair with this guy. Stop saying it's an affair. They see us together more often than they see me with you, that's all. I think that in itself speaks volumes. He's a friend of Neve's and we spend time together. When you get to know him better, you'll like him. 7. I have no intention of getting to know him. The man has no morals and he's trying to seduce my wife. Unfortunately, he seems to be succeeding. Only how far does it go? Mostly talking, dancing, and kissing. Yeah, we've kissed a few times, nothing special. Paul glared at her. It's a big deal to me, and you're in damage limitation mode. I suppose it's not just that. Even if you haven't had anything, it's where it's going. Our marriage is hanging by a thread, and you seem intent on destroying it. Are you in love with him? What? No, of course not. There must be some sort of attraction. We like each other, but we're just good friends. Nothing more. How often did you and he see each other? Were you very comfortable together? Well, we saw each other on Thursdays, and I had lunch with him. Jesus, did you and him have actual dates? No, just had lunch. He's good company, and that's flattering for a young guy. I like him, and I have no idea why, but he seems to like me. You just described the date. What was this dating party for? Was it done to humiliate me? God, no. I wanted you to meet him. I thought you'd like him. He's a great guy, and I told him about you. I thought we could all be friends, and it would ease any tension or misunderstandings. Wait a minute. You don't think I'm going to agree to that, do you? You have to realize that he's going to want more than that, because it's obvious that he wants to entertain you, and it's becoming more and more obvious what you want. You're getting way ahead of yourself. I haven't gotten to that point yet. But if we both agree and things get closer to that, would that be so bad? Honey, I don't mean to be unkind, but you've been a little slow on the uptake, and we haven't been able to find a solution to your performance problem. I'm sure we'll find one, but a little innocent fun with Will might smooth things over. Jane immediately realized that she had made a terrible mistake. It looked like Paul was about to explode. But her phrase, just good friends, seemed weak even to herself. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. You're a bitch. So it's about sex and it's my fault. Screw you, Jane. Paul slammed all the doors, getting ready to leave. Damn it, exclaimed Jane disappointedly, telling herself that she was an absolute idiot. Did she even realize what she was doing? She wasn't going to continue, but managed to hint to Paul that he should be replaced in her bed. She was in big trouble. Why had she mentioned his performance? Paul had always been a terrific lover. Sometimes he had episodes where things didn't work out, but he made it up to her, and the doctor was sure they could patch things up. If anything, she was the one who hadn't made much of an effort. After years of exhausting her children, they still hadn't been able to mend their relationship. The realization that her marriage was in danger came as a shock to Jane. Paul loved her and had always been supportive. Hadn't he? She definitely loved him and cared for him as she always had. And the situation with Will was just confusing, and she was sure it would pass. Paul felt like a complete failure. The thought of his wife leaving him because he wasn't successful in the bedroom was absolutely crushing. He considered moving out or divorce, but decided that would be the quickest way to make sure Jane ended up in bed with Will. How far had things gotten? Kissing seemed like a weak reason to end a 22-year marriage, but he suspected it went much farther than that. And then there was the children and family to think about. How would they react? Thank God they were grown now, but they would still be hurt. For now, he decided it was best to hang on and hope Jane would come to her senses. He realized it was a shitty plan with minimal chance of success, but he didn't know what else to do. Jane was desperate to find a way to solve Paul's problems without losing anything of her current lifestyle. She was overly nice and constantly apologized for the party, but it only got worse from there. The next stumbling block was the planned Thursday night out. Paul, I know Thursday is going to be difficult for you. Seriously, are you still going out? We're going out for drinks with friends, that's all. Sharon mentioned a free movie ticket and I thought you might want to go with her, rather than indulge in reflection. What are you doing, Jane, trying to set me up with our neighbor to ease your conscience? Don't be silly, Paul. You are mine and mine alone. But we can both be friends with others, and you two have always gotten along very well. Paul shook his head. He couldn't figure out if Helen didn't notice it or if she just didn't care. Come to think of it, he was the one who had put all the effort into their relationship. Maybe Jane loved him, but just didn't feel any sympathy for him, he pondered. Whether after 22 years of marriage it was possible to move into the friend zone. When Thursday evening came, Jane changed her outfit to a simple skirt and blouse, but went out for the evening anyway. kissing Paul goodbye and assuring him that it was just a normal group party and nothing bad would happen. Paul went to the movie with Sharon after all. They had been friends and neighbors with Sharon and her husband Mike for many years until Mike was killed in a car accident. Picking up Sharon, Paul was surprised. She looked very cute in a summer dress and wedge-heel sandals. Her shoulder-length blonde hair was slicked back behind her ear to one side. There was a natural ease to the whole outfit that matched her personality. She blushed when Paul complimented her. "Wow, your hair looks great. You look just angelic." "Shut up, you idiot," she replied, punching him on the arm. They enjoyed watching the movie and then went for coffee afterwards. Paul was the perfect gentleman, and Sharon was the perfect counselor to make sure he didn't go crazy. Thankfully, she assured him that he wasn't, but tried to play devil's advocate. Said, "I think we both know how important friends are to her, and I understand why she needs it." "Yes, I agree. I've never been against friends, hobbies, and night out. I support all of that." So the stumbling block is the relationship with Will. Partly there are other issues. Disrespect, selfishness. But here we are, man and woman, friends in a relationship and at a night out. Is it that much different? Paul laughed heartily. "Nice try, Sharon. And I'm sure that's exactly what Jane had planned." But she realized it was going over the top. If we had started kissing, it would have been a very different relationship. Sharon smiled at the thought of kissing Paul. It was a very pleasant thought. They chatted quietly on less painful topics. Paul, as always, asked about her and her family and listened carefully to her answers. Despite his obvious worries, he never forgot to laugh and joke. She was left wondering what Jane was doing. It all seemed so unusual. Jane was the kindest person she knew and had been so supportive of her after Mike's death. They agreed to meet up the following week if Jane was out walking with her group again. Jane's evening went according to plan. She vowed to keep her distance and calm Will down, and she succeeded, except for one dance when he managed to cut in. Everything was going according to plan until he offered her a ride home. It was ridiculous to refuse, and she had to explain the situation with Paul to him. It didn't take more than 10 minutes before they started kissing again. Paul, back from his night out with Sharon, sat at the kitchen table for what seemed like an eternity. He was on his third mug of beer when Jane finally came home. She tried to look happy and carefree, as if nothing had happened. "You got home late?" "Yeah, a little." "Who was out walking?" "The usual crowd." "You know what I'm asking." "Yeah, Will was there, but he mostly stayed with Nev." "You should check social media before you lie any further." Jane cast a quick glance around. Damn, one of the girls must have taken a picture. She was standing in front of Will in the background. He had his arms around her, pulling her to him. It was just the end of a dance with a friend. Said that. "Well, it's great that everyone can see an image of you and him, thanks for that. It's not humiliating at all. Did that friend give you a ride?" "No, hell yes he did." Jane sighed and tried to calm down. "Yes, Paul, Will gave me a ride." "You look very flushed." "We were talking about us. I told him we should keep our distance." "It's good that there are 3 of us in this relationship now. What else have you been doing?" Jane lowered her head. She was beginning to be overcome with tears and emotion. "I love you. I'm so sorry. I don't know what's happening to me." "Have you had sex?" "No, Paul, I didn't." "But you wanted to. You wanted to entertain him." "I don't know. Yes, I wanted to go further, but I didn't because I love you." "Love you, but not as much as I love your boyfriend. Are you going to stop seeing him?" "I don't know if I can. I can't seem to control my actions around Will. I know I'm hurting you. That's the last thing I want to do." "But that's exactly what you're doing. You know it, and yet you can't or won't stop. Obviously, continuing your relationship with him is more important to you." "I'm sick of your behavior and disrespect. I'm leaving and going to my brother's." Jane was shocked. "Please don't, Paul. I'll stop." "The truth is you don't want to stop. It's quite clear what you want." Jane burst into tears. "Please, please stay with me. I can't lose you." Next chapter. Paul stayed, but to say their relationship was cold for the next few weeks would be an understatement. Jane tried to be nice, but even simple conversations were strained. At least she had started skipping Thursday nights, and Paul hoped that was a good sign. He decided to make an effort to get things back on track and made reservations at their favorite restaurant for the following Friday night. They had celebrated so many happy occasions there and knew the owners. Paul hoped it would be special there and they could talk again like they used to. He mentioned this to Jane, hoping she would be surprised and delighted. Jane was indeed delighted with the treat and thought it was a wonderful gesture. Paul really was a kind and patient man. And then she was startled. She remembered that she already had reservations for Friday. Paul, you're so kind, but can't we reschedule for Saturday? I suppose so, but why? Helen has tickets to the charity ball and I promised to go. It's a big event to benefit the local hospice. You'd rather do that than go out with me to try and save our marriage? No, I'm not saying that. We can do both. I'm sorry, but I've already said I'll go. It's an important night for Helen because she's on the organizing committee. Helen won't mind. She called me and apologized for her involvement in all this. Jane hesitated, clearly trying to find some reason to rebook. She looked a little flustered, and Paul hadn't expected such a reaction. And then it hit him. If it was such an important night for Helen, then all their friends had to go to it. Shit, it is, isn't it? No, it's just a big event, important to Helen, and everyone's going. So he won't be there? Jane looked away. Oh, now I get it. You were planning to meet your boyfriend and Friday is the big night? No, it's not. I give up. You've got to be kidding. You begged me to stay with you and promised me you'd stop, but you'd rather go out with him. It's a good thing I know what your priorities are, my dear wife. Paul hoped Jane would change her mind, but she was determined that she couldn't miss this event. She and Helen had been planning this day for a long time, booking treatments and buying new dresses. Yes, the boys would be there, but so would all their other friends. It was a big event. Paul made sure that he wouldn't be home the moment the fatal nail was going to be hammered into his marriage. He had hoped to avoid communicating with Jane, but he couldn't resist reading the messages she kept sending. 19.00. Just leaving. Sorry you weren't here when I left. I love you. 20.03. Great party, very relaxed, raising lots of money for the hospice. There was a picture of Helen and Jane in an embrace, and he thought they both looked amazing. Paul had never seen Jane wear something like this before. It was a tight evening gown of a deep ocean blue color with silver sequins. Paul wondered who had taken the picture and who Jane was dressing for. 21.25. Miss you. Love you very much. 10:44 p.m. Don't wait up for me. I think the party will go on for a long time. 11:50 p.m. Don't worry, I'm fine. Having a great time. See you soon. XXC. 1:10 a.m. Decided to stay at Helen's as I'm very drunk. See you tomorrow. I love you very much. It was nearly 11 a.m. when Jane got home. She walked into the kitchen and couldn't bring herself to look at Paul. Paul just knew. It wasn't even worth asking if she was having fun. Finally, Jane was able to look at him. I'm so sorry. You're always apologizing. It just happened. It wasn't planned. I don't think that's true, Jane. It was very much planned. Was it worth it? Did it rock your world? I don't want to go into details, Paul. He was enthusiastic, and we felt differently, but I think I've gotten over it. That's nice of you. I'm leaving. Really? Threatening to run off to your brothers again instead of solving our problems? No, no threats this time, and those are your problems, not mine. Goodbye, Jane. At that moment, Jane noticed the packed suitcase and backpack in the dressing room. She tried desperately to think of something to make him stay, but she couldn't think of anything. What she had done to him was horrible. She really hadn't thought about the consequences of the decisions she had made in a drunken frenzy the previous night. She figured she would have time to explain and apologize properly. Paul left without a word. His phone rang before he reached the end of the street, but he ignored it. By the time he got to his brother's, Jane had sent 27 messages. He read them, mostly apologizing and begging to get back to her. Jane couldn't believe Paul was gone. The house seemed somehow wrong without him. She heard a knock on the door and, hoping it was Paul, hurried to answer it, but she saw Sharon on the doorstep. Jane immediately burst into tears and received a comforting hug in return. She told Sharon her version of what had happened last night. Most of the events matched what Paul had described to Sharon, but Jane explained things differently. At times it seemed like innocent tomfoolery, devolving into a romantic fairy tale. Sharon made no attempt to hide her opinion. How would you feel if Paul and I kissed? You'd be crazy to risk losing him, especially over some boy trying to overstep his bounds. Jane jumped up from her seat. You bitch, you've always liked him. You're after my Paul. Sharon smiled patiently. We're friends, and I would never try, but if you throw him out, I might do that. Jane burst into more tears. I guess I could probably throw him out last night. I... Oh, please tell me you didn't. You're a complete idiot. Not getting any encouragement from Sharon, Jane called Helen. What were you thinking, girl? Guys like Nev and Will are fun to be with, but only for brief flings. You wouldn't leave a man like Paul for them, and you certainly wouldn't rub his face in it. I thought I just needed to put it out of my mind, have fun with Will, and then concentrate on Paul. Helen thought Jane was a naive fool. Paul would never agree to such a thing. The thing is, Helen, Will is wonderful. I had an amazing time. It lasted for months. That's wonderful, Jane. But then what about you and Paul? I honestly don't know. I was hoping I could switch to Paul and get things back to normal, but I don't think he will, and I can't blame him. I feel awful about it, but at the same time, last night was like a life-changing experience. Jane had been begging Paul to come back for weeks, but he wouldn't. She worried about him. His brother and sister-in-law were good people, but it wasn't the same as his wife's concern for him, and she knew he would miss her despite her actions. In the end, she resigned herself to the fact that it was a hopeless case. Even if she behaved better, her actions would always keep them apart. Jane decided that the kindest thing she could do was to let Paul move on with his life and stop stalking him. Despite her actions, she was sure she loved him, which meant letting him go before she hurt him more. They had to keep in contact about the kids, and they managed that interaction just fine, getting along quite well with each other. Divorce was out of the question, but they agreed to continue to pay half the mortgage each and treat the house as an investment, selling or buying it back when either of them needed or wanted to. Despite his refusal to return home, Jane was surprised that Paul had dealt with his anger and resentment so quickly. She deserved and expected more rants and accusations. Then it dawned on her what might have caused it. Are you seeing someone? Maybe Sharon? Sharon, what makes you say that? You two have always gotten along so well and she's shown an interest in you. Really? I had no idea. She's dating someone else anyway. And I'm kind of dating Marie. Marie, the receptionist from your job, oh my god, she can only be 35. Paul snapped back. But she's still older than bloody Will. Jane's initial irritation evaporated in an instant. She paused, trying to gather her thoughts. I'm sorry, Paul, she's a nice girl and I hope things work out for you. It's just beginning. Paul and Marie went on a few dates. 2 weeks later, they formalized their relationship with no work issues. Paul wondered if his problems had anything to do with Jane's lack of interest and desire for him. The mention of Marie made Jane realize that Paul had left her. After she accepted the fact that he was not coming back, her social life took off. She began seeing Will on a regular basis. Jane found that she enjoyed flirting and that she was good at it. Many guys were very interested, especially after learning that she had broken up. 22 years of marriage. It dawned on her that she had missed out on so much with Paul. She wasn't in a serious relationship with Will, and she knew he was still seeing other women. So when the handsome young guy from work, Rob, flirted with her, she encouraged him, and eventually, he got up the courage to ask her out, and she readily accepted. When he arrived at the restaurant, she said, "Relax, honey, we're just friends socializing. You don't need to impress me. I already like you." After the initial shock, it worked, and Rob relaxed. They had a nice evening. Next chapter. Jane was surprised when Paul knocked on the door one day, looking rather embarrassed. She invited him in and made coffee. "I need to ask you a favor, Jane." "Sure, anything." "It's not easy to say, but business has been a little shaky. I've had extra expenses and cash flow problems. I managed to send the same money to the kids, but I'm struggling to pay my half of the mortgage on this apartment. I'll get it all sorted out, but the money will come late." Jane thought for a moment. "We can sell it if you want, Paul. You were wise to let me stay." "No, that's not it. It's a good investment for both of us until we're ready to sell or buy each other out. I just need the extra time." "Okay, how about I cover the payments? I have some savings." "No, I was just thinking of asking the bank to defer the payments for a while." "I can't use your savings." Jane smiled, knowing that was exactly what Paul was going to say. They may not have been together, but she knew him better than anyone else. "All right, Paul, you have provided for our family over the years and have never once let us down. Compared to that, this is nothing. Nothing at all, I insist." Paul looked uncomfortable. I'm not sure. I don't think it's right. To be honest, I'm glad I can do it. I have no doubt that you can handle it. You always do. I'll gladly give you the money, but I'll call it a loan if it helps. Paul seemed to think deeply. A loan maybe, but we'll need a written agreement to make it official. Jane smiled. Suit yourself, Paul, but you are the most honest man I know. You'll do whatever you say, you'll pay me back, and you've already started thinking about paying me interest. I'll refuse, of course, but you already know that. Paul smiled. We do know each other well. I think we have an agreement, and Jane thanks you. It's the least I could do. In any case, I caused our breakup and the additional financial burden you are now struggling with. As Paul left, Jane wept, their conversation a pleasant reminder of the hundreds, perhaps thousands of similar instances over the years. She would gladly give Paul anything he asked for. Jane had a reputation at work for being hot, and potential lovers were always wanting to date her. She often heard them refer to her as a hot wife, MILF, or cougar, and it thrilled her. She had always been unassuming when she was young, and this kind of attention was new to her. She knew that some people would call her a slut or promiscuous, but she decided to put up with it, thinking a guy in a similar position could be called hot. Dating was a lot of fun, but more often than not she felt lonely and it was getting a little tiring. As you'd expect, the breakup had been emotionally traumatic, but she should be over it by now and enjoying life to the fullest. So why wasn't she feeling better? Jane saw Paul and Marie together regularly. She felt the usual feelings of jealousy, but then chided herself. After all, she was the cause. She noticed how easily they talked and how comfortable they felt around each other, smiling and laughing often. She still wished Paul all the best. He was a good man and deserved it. All of this was in stark contrast to her own short relationship. Even if the right man had offered something more serious, she would have found a reason to turn him down. Despite what Jane saw, Paul and Marie's relationship was beginning to stagger. They liked each other, but there was no spark. Perhaps Paul was in too much of a hurry and Marie was younger. They felt it at the same time and agreed to remain friends, albeit with privileges. Marie insisted that by all means they should continue to enjoy each other until she found the right mister. Next chapter. Paul and Jane stood on the railroad platform, seeing their children off to university after the Easter break. They had spent time with both parents to get used to the new arrangements, and it had gone relatively smoothly. Jane smiled at Paul. Would you like to have coffee with us? Sure, why not? So then, after they talked about the kids, there was an awkward silence, each immersed in their own thoughts. Jane filled in the blank. I'm so sorry about the way things went with us, Paul. I still loved you, but I blew it. Was it worth it? Did you find what you were looking for? It's hard to answer. I lost so much with you, but I have to admit I enjoyed exploring other things. Paul laughed. By other things, you mean having fun with young guys? Jane smiled. I'm pleased that you can laugh about that, Paul. It's partly true, but I miss the friendship and companionship. Paul frowned. So that's what we were to you at the end. Friendship, with no attraction or desire. Jane was shocked. No, why would you think that? You were never that interested. Then another guy came along and suddenly you couldn't resist and now you can't get enough. There were tears in Jane's eyes. Please don't ever think like that. I have always loved you and I still do. I took our relationship for granted and didn't put my whole heart into it. I always had more important things on my mind, my children, my friendships, myself. Don't ever think that I didn't love you or didn't want you. If we had done what you advised, I think we would still be together. It opened up a side of me that I didn't realize I had, and I wish I had discovered it with you. Paul was surprised by Jane's answer. She seemed sincere. He was still trying to make sense of her words when she continued. I'm glad you're experiencing all that with Marie. I don't have that. The companionship and the fact that you obviously can't get away from each other. She's lucky, and I'm truly happy for you both. Paul hesitated. Yes, we're doing well, but it's more like friends with benefits. It's fun, but I hope she can find someone to settle down with and love completely. Jane wondered, and it's not you? No, unfortunately, I don't think so. She needs someone her own age. We are still friends, but neither of us have that feeling. It's hard to explain. Our relationship is great, but something is missing. Jane sighed. Yes, I remember that feeling. We had it before I lost it. She's an idiot if she let you go. Is there really no one else? A few dates, but nothing serious. Can't find a date. Before she could think through the implications, Jane whispered, "Maybe you should date me." Paul was silent for what seemed like hours, but was really only moments. Jane was beginning to regret her remark and was already starting to think of a joke to make. Then Paul smiled, or was it a grimace? But then he stopped, sighed, and looked at Jane. "Maybe we should do that." They agreed to try for dinner the following Friday, leaving each other plenty of time to change their minds and back out. Next chapter. Jane began to panic after her first night with Paul. She kept telling herself it was just another date, but she wasn't sure she could handle that level of emotion. If things didn't go her way, she'd be upset, and she didn't want to hurt Paul. They went out a few more times, both dating other people. Will had left, but Jane was seeing other guys, and Paul was still seeing Marie. She wasn't sure if he wanted anything more than a casual relationship and was afraid to ask in case she lost him again. That all changed when they ran into each other at one of the bars downtown. Jane was on a date. They had just entered the bar as Paul was leaving, having finished having a drink with one of the customers. Jane introduced her husband to Justin. Justin became jealous, hinting at what he and Jane would do that night. Jane, wasting no time, made it clear that the date would be short-lived if he continued to misbehave, and that her husband would always be her priority. Paul was shocked by Jane's statement, but not as much as her date, who grinned and strode off in the direction of the bar. Jane apologized to Paul and asked him to wait for her at the door. She turned to her companion again. "I have to go now. Thanks to your bad behavior and attempt to embarrass my husband, I am leaving with him." Her companion was confused with anger and apologized. Jane continued, "Maybe we can go out next weekend, thank you. You just made sure my husband will try very hard to get me back tonight. Oh, and don't ever ask me to choose. He always wins." With those words, Jane turned and strode away, clicking her heels together to link arms with Paul and walk away together. Her companion watched her remove herself and cursed his big mouth. The day after the fight at the restaurant and 2 months after they started dating again, they were sitting at a downtown bar drinking wine. Paul noticed the concerned expression on Jane's face. "Are you okay? What's the matter?" "I'm really enjoying myself with you, but I want to know if you see that things go beyond casual dating and having fun." "I'm not sure, to be honest. I like it too, but maybe it's best not to force things. I liked that last night you turned down a date for me and said I was a priority for you. You always will be. I know I haven't shown it to you in the past, but you've always been my one true love. I like going on dates, but I still feel pretty lonely. I don't have what you and Marie have, someone to share with. Actually, Marie started dating someone. We stopped, you know, and I'm planning on moving out." "Where will you go?" "Probably to my brother's, although Cindy, his wife, is expecting a baby." That was a stupid idea. She couldn't bring herself to say it, and then she blabbed anyway and couldn't stop babbling. "You're not thinking of moving in with me, are you? Not as husband and wife or anything like that, but as a boarder or a lodger or... Actually, you're still a co-owner, so you have every right to move in. Anyway, if you want to, the offer still stands. We could be friends or something." The last remark was accompanied by a nervous wave of her hand, whereupon Jane's voice broke off. "Friends with benefits?" Paul asked with a broad smile on his face. "Of course we're married anyway, so you're entitled to that. I guess that makes you a wonderful wife and me some kind of asshole." Jane laughed. "Hardly, considering how much you talk about it, and the fact that you dumped me as soon as I was done with Will. We can try, I guess. I know what I'm getting into, and so far we're being honest with each other. I like your companionship, and I've always loved you, but I don't want to turn into a grumpy housewife with borderline depression again. I still want to date other people, and I insist that you date too, or it won't be fair." Paul smiled, remembering. "You know, I always liked that housewife, and you were never that awkward in my eyes." "I know. It was so special, and I was a bloody idiot. I let you down and ruined our marriage. I don't want to hurt you again." Paul tried to weigh the consequences before giving up. It was too complicated for his brain. "Okay, I guess we can try." Paul moved in with the idea of using the spare room, but that idea was discarded the first night and they shared their old bedroom. They were quickly back to their old habits. Everything was familiar and comfortable. Despite this, they were both hesitant to start a new relationship and continued to date others, although their frequency had greatly reduced. Next chapter. Jane pondered Paul's remark about a beautiful wife. She wondered how she, the most ordinary middle-aged housewife, married to the most ordinary and loving husband, had gotten to the point of having so much fun with different partners. It wasn't an easy road, but is she glad she went through it? She's still not sure of the answer. Over time, Jane naturally cut back on her excesses, happy to be spending more time with Paul. Her dates became less frequent, about once a month, usually with a nervous Rob, her first lover after Will. She was pleased to see his newfound confidence and the way he had matured, believing she had helped him along the way. It was part of their relationship now, and other men seemed less important. The difference was Paul. Now she realized he was the most important thing in her life. There were difficult moments. Both felt a little awkward getting ready for dates when the other was in the house. One night, lying in bed, Jane apologized again for her nightly escapades with Helen. "Do you still see her?" "Not often sometimes, but things didn't work out between her and Nev, and she's working hard now." "Did she tell you she asked me out?" "Absolutely not. When did that happen?" "She called a few times and apologized for her involvement in what was going on. About a month after I left, she asked if I would consider dating her in the future if we didn't get back together. She offered to dump Nev and said I was the type of guy she was always looking for. I was shocked, she was a beauty, and it was a much-needed ego boost. Helen said I was a fool to risk losing you to Will, and I guess that's what she meant. Did you meet her then?" "No, not then, but I ran into her a few months later, and as you can imagine, I didn't." "Oh, wow. I think you had a good time. Helen is amazing and great in bed." Paul raised his eyebrows. "You know that?" "Maybe," Jane laughed. "I experimented a lot after we broke up. You didn't go out with her again?" "No, she suggested it herself, but I thought we were too close. If I couldn't trust you, Helen couldn't either. Oh, and the fact that she had your back." Jane fell silent. "I hate to think that you lost your trust in others because of me. Helen was my best friend. She tried to warn me against getting too close to Will, but she didn't stop me. She was happily married for many years until her husband cheated. She's not a bad person. I can't blame anyone else. It was all my fault it all happened." Next chapter. They were cozying up to the TV when Paul's phone rang. It was Sharon, sobbing uncontrollably. He couldn't make out the words, but it was obvious that she had broken up with her fiancé. Paul apologized to Jane and went to Sharon's house. Several hours passed before he learned the whole story of the breakup. The guy had left her for his ex. It was all a complete surprise to Sharon. Paul hugged her and told her everything would be okay. She was so upset that he feared for her safety. He managed to get her into bed, while he himself stayed in the spare room and called Jane to tell her the news. Jane supported him and arrived the next day with lunch and cans of soup. When Paul pointed out all those tubes, Jane smiled and said that was all she had eaten during their breakup. She had eaten almost nothing for 2 months. Paul was surprised that Jane was so upset. He assumed she had carried on with her exciting new life the day after he left. They kept in daily contact and helped Sharon through her long and slow recovery. Eventually, Paul talked her into going to the movies with him again. She loved movies, especially reruns of 50s classics. This led to other evenings, including murder mystery nights where she dressed up as characters from Agatha Christie novels set in the 1920s and 30s. Dating with Jane had stopped as Rob had found himself a new girlfriend. He thanked Jane for all she had taught him, and she wished him luck with his new novel. Paul more than met her needs, and she found that she wanted, to possibly be faithful. She knew she still loved Paul and had never loved anyone else. In their former life, as she had described it, she had taken him for granted. Now she found herself enjoying his company. She spent almost all her time with him and enjoyed it. The dates were fun and exciting, Paul was interesting and a good conversationalist, and she could rely on him all the time. She was jealous of him and Sharon, but took it as further proof of how good a man he was. Since his time was divided between Jane and supporting Sharon, Paul had little time to date anyone else. Paul and Jane were sitting on the back porch enjoying a beer and a glass of wine. "Paul, do you think we could be a married couple again? I haven't dated anyone in the last 4 months and I'd like to be yours alone." The suggestion took Paul by surprise. I don't know, Jane. It's a big step and I'm not sure. I love you, Paul, and I want you back. I need to think about it. Can you give me some time? Sure, take as much time as you need. Just know that I'm always here for you and I've always loved you. A week later, they were sitting in the same seats again. You don't regret anything, Jane? Paul waited, intrigued by Jane's answer. No, you're back in my life now. I regret the way things happened and the way I treated you. I was fascinated by Will, and all Helen's stories about Neva made me feel like I was missing something in my life. I can blame age and menopause, but I became very selfish and lost sight of you. I never thought you would leave me. I wish we had learned more about our life together years ago, but it was my fault. I'm glad I discovered that side of me, but I wish it was just between us. It took quite some time before Paul replied. I still regret it bitterly. We made the best of a bad situation, but I lost the reliability of the marriage and my trust in people. I still don't think I've fully recovered, and I need to. Jane was shocked. She had assumed Paul would react positively, for they were doing well. Their life together had been wonderful, and they had both undoubtedly benefited from their experience. You can trust me, Paul. You know I've stopped dating, and I'll always be honest with you. You were honest the first time. You knew what you were doing. You knew how it would affect me, and you went ahead and confessed your love to me anyway. His voice quivered and faded away. Tears came to Jane's eyes. She realized with horror that they had not repaired their relationship, but had only mended the cracks. Paul took a deep breath. I talked to Sharon about your proposal, and she surprised me with an alternative. She asked me to consider moving in with her. Paul and Sharon's growing feelings were undeniable. They had always been friends, their conversations easy and casual. In recent months, they had both felt the attraction but had hesitated, and now Jane's request made them think about it. Sharon had stopped holding back. She saw this as her last chance to tell Paul her true feelings for him. I still love you, Jane, and I might even be able to trust you again, but I don't want to forget what you did. I don't think it was fair. Trusting someone so much to then have that illusion shattered like that. Please don't do this, Paul. I've changed. You can trust me. If Will or Rob came back, would you give up on them? Maybe, but I'll never be sure. History doesn't cancel, and I know you're still flirting and enjoying the attention. Jane grimaced at the truthfulness of Paul's words. I can't live in doubt and I can't give you more. I wish I could, but I just can't. Sharon is completely honest and so caring that I can't imagine her doing what you did. There are no guarantees, but it just feels right to me. Jane lowered her eyes sadly. She kept her promise. She said she would try for you if I left you, and I think in the end she did. I think she tried to stay out of our problems, but our feelings grew. Jane could see that Paul was hesitating. His decision was not final. She was about to insist on her own, when suddenly it hit her. You're right, Paul. I like being wanted and feeling like myself while doing it. I don't regret it. It makes me feel alive. Paul's eyes flashed with anger. He was about to attack verbally, but seeing the tears in Jane's eyes, he nodded and stood up. Thank you, Jane. If I had loved you less, maybe we could have worked things out, but you almost destroyed me. We had a wonderful marriage, and we still have children, but we need to move on. I'll pick up my things tomorrow. Jane held on until she heard the front door close and then burst into hysterical tears. She had lost him again. She had to let him go, but it didn't make the pain any less. Paul started divorce proceedings, and both lawyers said it was the friendliest divorce they had ever witnessed. They continued to pay half the mortgage each. Paul now lived with Sharon, and Jane stayed in their old house despite repeated offers to move out. They remained friendly, exchanging events and contacts through the children. Sharon worried about Jane and how lonely she seemed, while her own relationship with Paul blossomed. Jane started going on dates again, but it wasn't the same. The excitement was gone. She really wanted Paul and Sharon to have things the way she did. She could see for herself how they spent their days and nights together, and that they were so right for each other. She tried her best to be happy for them, but she couldn't shake off the bitter aftertaste. It was the vacations that plagued her the most. Jane and Paul had spent years making a list of places to visit when they couldn't afford a vacation while the children were young. Now Paul and Sharon were experiencing those places together and planning others. 6 months later, Paul and Sharon's engagement took place. This event and the fact that they saw each other so often became too painful for Jane. She moved into an apartment, selling their old house and splitting the profits with Paul. Jane was still looking for someone to settle down with, but that person proved elusive. People her age had different baggage under their belt and were pretty hardened. It didn't help that she now had a certain reputation that attracted suitors, but no one was looking for a serious long-term relationship. Now, the invitation to the wedding followed 3 months later. Jane couldn't bring herself to go to it, although the children were very happy for their father and the adoptive mother they knew and loved so well. Jane sat and thought again about how she had left Paul. Perhaps, after all, there was natural justice in it, for her selfishness and greed deserved the half-life she had given herself. The end. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and watch for the next video.